I'll say good afternoon, good evening to you. Glad to be with you. I want to start off by saying that I have made a slight change in our miracles teaching. I think a couple of you had asked last week, what would we be covering? And I told you, I've got my collection of things, but the more I thought about it, I thought, I want to do this different. I want to do this in chronological order. And it was designed, this set of lessons that I have here was designed to be sort of grouped in different orders. And so there was, for a better way of saying it, there was miracles of nature, and then there was miracles of physical healing. We talked about all that on the initial date. But I think that it would work better if we look at these in order in which they happen. Because I think sometimes when you look at things chronologically, you can see a build up as it goes. You can help to understand. And what might happen, I'm a little bit worried about, is if we cover one and then we cover a different variety, you'll say, wait a minute, I thought they had already done that. And then so I think it'll work better. So it worked out pretty good. The first one that we did was the first one that Jesus did, the wedding at Cana. Last week, what did we talk about? The fishes, right? Well, that's the third one. So we're going to jump in to the second one here tonight. So you can just suspend your disbelief from, just act like last week didn't happen until about 7:30 tonight, and then it'll all be good. Then you can come back to life with that, and it'll all work out for you pretty well right there. We are going to be in John chapter 4. John chapter 4 this evening, and we're going to be talking about the nobleman's son. Now, sometimes he's called the official, the officer, any number of different terms that could be used there. It's sort of in the translation as to what it would be. But we're in John, the 4th chapter, and we'll be looking at verses 46 through 54. We'll do as we've done, a little introduction. We'll read from that here in a few moments. I think we got a couple other readings that we'll be looking at as well. And then we'll ask some questions, and try to go home with a few things tonight as well. So we're talking about the miracles of Jesus. Tonight is our third lesson. I guess I should have called it lesson 2B or something like that, whatever works. But anyway, the reading that we did is not anything for what we're talking about. So what Dad read there a little bit ago is not really what we're talking about, but it did show that Jesus had been moving. And I think that's the goal for what I want us to start out with. Because the first one, Jesus had attended the marriage there at Cana of Galilee, and he turned the water into wine. And then we read then that he had went to Capernaum, and then after that, he went to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, which was a common thing for people to have to go to. Here's a map showing this. I don't know if it'll show up real well for you, but I knew the question was going to come up, and so I thought I'm going to look up the distance between these two places, or these different places. Now, I will say this. This is a Google Maps today, all right? So this is most likely, if I'm in a car at one, I'm going to get to the other. But I suspect that the distance isn't going to be too much different, because even like here, most of our roads were animal paths, and we just sort of paved over them and showed it. But this shows you Jesus moving, but I want you to get a concept in your head of the distance, not only that he was moving, we can think about it in a religious sense, but also just in a general, how far it was to go from point A to point B, and think about how you would have made that trip. So if we look at this to start with, they were in, as you can see here, Nazareth, where Jesus was from. You got the Cana, where the wedding had been, over to Capernaum. That's 16 and a half miles. All right. So what's 16 and a half miles from here? What would that be? Halfway to Somerset. Oh, it feels like it's 4 billion miles from here to Somerset. So Broadhead, maybe that'd probably about right. Headed that way. So just think about walking from here to Broadhead. And not only that, for us walking, we're going to walk out here on 27 and then on 150, and it's going to be a pretty good wide road. There's going to be a large shoulder on the side. It would be relatively safe for us to be able to make that kind of trip, right? But that's how far Jesus went. Now that's to Capernaum. Now, if you come down then to Jerusalem, That's 79 miles. What's 79 miles from here? Is that Louisville? About Louisville, from here to Louisville, something like that?
Back in those days, they considered people walk 3 miles an hour.
Okay.
So you can kind of get a thing there. 6 hours, people walk that because they're in good shape. These people are in good shape.
Right.
Not like us, that they're in good shape. They're used to walking. If they chose to walk.
Sure.
You don't have to.
Sure.
You took a horse first when you get there in half a day.
Right.
The next one about 3 days.
But these are not, we would, if somebody said tonight, I need you to take me to Broadhead, we'd all probably sign up for that. And we'll be there and, we'll be there in 20 minutes and be back another time. Even most of us, we could probably say, how is it very far to Louisville? I don't maybe want to go to Louisville, but it's not that far to get up there and back. Josh, you're not allowed to answer any of those questions right there. This is irrelevant to you and your dad and those kinds of questions. But truthfully, Ben, it's probably for you as well. You cover a lot of these sort of mileages on yours as well. But I wanted to show you this because we read there that he had been sort of moving about in these areas. And so I wanted you to get a sense of where this was. Let's turn back, though, to John chapter 2 to start with. Because after he had done all this, this is where we see that this movement. So you can see it sort of scripturally here as well. John 2. This is verse 12 through 17. Jill, do you care to read that? Yes. So we've got a lot of movement here going on because we looked on our map. This is right after the marriage at Cana, and he goes to Capernaum, and it says that he didn't stay very long, and then he goes down to Jerusalem. And the first thing that we see, at least that comes in contact here, is a story that we're probably all familiar with. Why were there oxen and sheep and doves? Why were these animals at the temple? So, say it again. To be bought for sacrifice. Right? You were required to make these kinds of sacrifices. And you could obviously keep these animals at home, but for a lot of people in their living condition, it might not have made sense to have a bunch of sheep in the house or whatever. And so you had the ability to make these purchases before you got there. And so it's almost like stopping to get a present at the store on the way to the birthday party. You can grab it along the way right there. But the thing is, when you get to the temple and you've got to make this offering, well, you've got to have that animal. So what's the charge on that animal going to be? It's probably a little higher, right? So let's just make up a number. Let's say it normally would cost $5. Well, why are they going to charge you there? They might charge you 10 or they might charge you 20 or whatever. Why can they do that? Because you need it, you got to have it. Yep. So what we see here then is this doesn't really set well with Jesus. Probably didn't set well with a lot of people, but people didn't really have a choice on this. They had to do it. So what then does Jesus say to them? He says what in the red there? Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise, the New King James Bible says right there. And so he's frustrated that the people's sacrifice, what's their main focus when they're making these sacrifices? Is it the sacrifice? No, it's maybe getting the best deal for what you're going to offer, or it might be making a little money, as Ben said there on the side, running that racket. Nobody's heart seems to be in the right place in this. And so how did Jesus respond? Clearly was angry. We read there, he said he'd made a whip of cords, drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, poured out the changers' money, and overturned the tables. This is a rare case that we see Jesus angry. If I were to say, or if you were to read in the newspaper that somebody did that sentence right there in a place of business, you said that person was really mad right there. Let's go a little further. John 2, verses 18. Dump the money out as well.
He's always his anger was always a righteous thing. He was never angry at the way people did him or about his issues. The only time you see him angry mentioned in the Bible is about people being taken advantage of, people doing wrong, righteous things.
So let's go a little bit further then, because this is not really the main point of it, but just to show sort of what was happening in the process. Lucille, do you care to read John 2, 18 to 25? Thank you very much. And so they said, after he sort of made this whole scene here, they said, what do you plan to show us, or what sign do you show us since you do these things? And he said, destroy the temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now, based on what you have literally just seen, why do you think the people that heard him say that thought he was talking about the physical structure? I mean, he's literally borderline destroying the temple right there. You're tearing up, the stuff, whatever it might would be. But when he said that, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And their first response, the obvious response, was what? It took 46 years to build this. I highly doubt we can get this done in a weekend, right? Is what we're sort of reading from that there. But he said, that's not what he was talking about. He goes on to Passover and all of that. But I just want to show you, this is what was happening sort of in the build-up to what we're going to be studying tonight. Okay? Any thoughts on that? Because, again, that's not the main point of our discussion, but if you want to throw anything in, you're welcome, Tim. And it's also fair to say, though, that we're pretty early in the Jesus story right here, too. So, this is, a lot of people maybe at this point are saying, I don't know who this is. I'm sure the water to wine story had made its way around, and we saw that last week with Peter, with the disciples. But remember, we're not actually there yet because I'm jumping back in. Josh.
And you think it's fair to say, too, since it's in the beginning, when Moses went to Pharaoh and he done his miracles, his magicians done the same thing. Some of these miracles that he's doing, you think that maybe they're thinking at the beginning, this might just be some magic tricks first.
Well, what did the master of ceremonies at the wedding say? He said, well, you brought all the good wine out later. There's probably somebody said, they probably found some at the back room. They forgot to set that out. There's only one thing that's happened really at the time. So it's possible that the speculation would have been easier to have come by at that point. Ben?
If you're really a prophet of God, show us proof. Show us a miracle.
All right.
That you're the prophet, that you're okay to do.
Right. Yes.
I like that last side. Lord, I don't know if there's no story. Jesus not committed himself to them because of you all need. Jesus did not need their adulation.
Right.
He did not, you see sometimes people that it's just a smidge of a claim, and boy, they just, yes, you're right, I am the greatest. And they just feast upon it. Jesus did not need their adulation because he knows a lot of it was fake.
Well, let's go to John chapter 4, and we'll see that he almost word for word make that same statement here in just a moment. So Jesus passes through Samaria. We don't spend a lot of time talking about this, but that's where he encounters the woman at the well. You probably know that story at the first part of John chapter 4. And he continues on, as we can see here, arriving at Cana. So we're kind of back to where we'd started from, where a nobleman came to him asking that he heal his son. Now, when we say nobleman, what does that really mean? Well, it's a little bit unclear what it means here, but it's likely some connection to the king in some way. This is somebody who would have known somebody, is the way we would maybe use that term here today. Might have been a relative of Herod Antipas, who was the king at the time, or who ruled Galilee at the time. Could have been an officer in the court. Doesn't really matter, but it does take us, we know that this is somebody who probably ranks pretty high. And the assumption here to me would be somebody that would have had connections to have tried to heal this kid. You know, if you're dirt poor and have nothing, you probably couldn't. But somebody here who knows the king, maybe some way to be able to get this fixed. He'd come from Capernaum, a day's journey, in order to seek the help of Jesus right there. And so this man has come for him. This is the remnants this is Capernaum. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank right here, but this is where Jesus would have been, and then healing a son of an officer. Is a little artistic work here. This is a new one, 1752. This is a modern compared to what we've been looking at the last few days. But let's look at John chapter 4 right here and see kind of how this story plays out. John chapter 4, verses 46 through 50. Melvina, do you care to read that one? We'll come back to that in a second, but let's go a little bit further. Will, do you care to read John 4, 51 through 54?
And as he was now going out, the servants met him and told him, saying, "Your son lives." Then he inquired of them the hour when he got better. And they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him." So the father knew that it was at the same hour when Jesus told him, "Your son lives." And he himself believed and his whole household. This again is the second sign Jesus did when he came out of Judea into Galilee.
All right. So we'll talk about a few things here to think about, a few things here to consider, because there's several things going on here within this story. First of all, let's just start from the very beginning, verses 46 and 47. Why did this man come to Jesus in the first place? His son was dying and clearly needed some kind of help, some way to come to him. Now, why come to Jesus? Okay. So we're back in Cana where this had all had originated, where it had taken place. And so I thought I was better, but today I feel like I have coughed more today than I have in a month. So I don't know. I don't know what's about to happen. Talking too much, I guess. So he's clearly heard, and it seems likely that marriage wedding at Cana story has probably made its way around. And you can see this guy saying, in my words, I'm kind of thinking like, well, if he can turn water to wine, maybe he can heal my son. You know, that they don't necessarily go together, but I mean, it's as good as anything else, right? So he came to Jesus in hopes of healing his son. Now, how sick was the son? But verse 47 says that he was at the point of death. So you take that for what it means, but it doesn't seem like he has too long to live. Just guessing, how many efforts do you think have been made to sort of save or help or heal his son? Probably several, and probably over a period of time, if we're just guessing. I mean, those are assumptions, but if he's at the point of death and he's going to talk to Jesus, and we don't really know much about this guy, we can sort of take a few things, glean a few things, but it's almost like it's probably the last chance. This is probably the last chance for this young man. And so what did, I have another typo, this is terrible. So what did Jesus tell the nobleman? Verse 48. I want everybody to look at verse 48 right there. What did Jesus tell the nobleman? So I don't know how you want to read this, but how do you interpret what Jesus said right there? Unless you see the signs and wonders, you will not believe. How do you interpret that verse? Okay. Think so? Okay. Okay. Well, that's what I was really thinking of, because if you go back to John chapter 2, verses 24 and 25, he didn't commit himself because he knew all men and had no need that anyone should testify, for he knew that people, they kind of like to see the show a little bit, right? They kind of like to see what happens. And it seems like, I think that you're right, Ben. I think that there was, this guy's far from a Christian, or far from a follower of Jesus at the time. But Jesus seems a little bit frustrated here with this. Like, well, I've done one, we did the water to wine. Now we will see something else, maybe just a little bit.
I mean, in the sense, you got Jesus, he's new on the scene. He's got to prove himself somehow to people that he is.
Right.
So in some aspects, can you blame, not blame, can you blame people for not wanting to see more proof?
Oh, sure. I think that's fairly fair, a fair statement to say. Now, in verse 49, then, though, what does the nobleman then ask again? John 4 and verse 49. Sir, come down before my child dies. And there's a sense of urgency in this second question. It's almost a begging. It is almost a pleading. That the first time it might have been like, oh, this is, you might have interpreted, but this is a serious question that's being asked right here. He says, come down again before my son dies. Now, how does Jesus answer him then? So Jesus said, basically go home. Your son lives. And what does the nobleman do? So whatever faith there was whenever he first appears, it appears to have grown some in this interaction, right? It appears it was worthy of sort of, I don't want to call what Jesus said a chastisement, but it was worthy of sort of hearing this chastisement maybe, and then yet again asking one more time, saying, begging almost, my son is going to die. And so he goes on his way. Well, you can't ask a third time, right? He's already been told, so he's going to go on his way. Now, we'll come back to that here in just a couple moments. As he's going home, who does this nobleman run into? His servants. And what are they saying? They come out and they say, well, your son, they come out and say that your son lives. Now, this would have been great news, right? This would have been great. But whenever he's coming down the road and he sees these servants, it's kind of a one or the other response, right? You're going to hear one. What are your two options that you're going to hear probably when you're coming down the road and you see the servants coming toward you? He's either alive or dead. All right. If he's dead, well, that's what we expected. And this guy he couldn't heal nobody. Or if he's alive, then what's that going to do to his faith in Jesus that was already starting to grow? It's going to make him believe even more. So it's kind of it's a black and white answer right here. It's either going to be a yes or a no. So the guy asks an important question here. He doesn't just accept, oh, he's better. But he says, we read in verse 52, what did he ask his servants? Now, this is probably a question that we've all asked. We've known people who have passed away, and for some reason, I don't know why, but one of the questions we'll say is, what time was it? They write that down on the death certificate, right? And they don't say 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, but if it's 2:51, they write down 2:51. That's meticulous record keeping. I don't know why we do it, but we do it. But he asked the same question right here. He says, when did he get better? Effectively what he's saying. And they responded with what? They responded in the 7th hour. Now you can see the wheels turning in his head there, right? It's like, oh, okay. So I'm looking at, in a sense, we're looking at our watch thinking, like, what was I doing yesterday at this time or whenever this happened? So what does the nobleman know then in verse 53? Puzzle pieces kind of came together here, right? It's like, wait a minute now. I was asking at the 7th hour, and y'all are telling me that he was healed in the 7th hour. 1 + 1 = what? You can kind of see it. It all sort of makes sense to this guy at this point. Now I want you to think for a second. I want you to put yourself in the man's shoes. What's going through your head when you're doing that math with your watch on these couple of questions? I think so. That's a lot clearer than it maybe have been even, just a few minutes earlier. What else is going through your head at that time? Right. It may not confirm it to everybody else, but it confirmed it to him. Uh-huh. When he left. Uh-huh. Right. Right. Right.
So he's overcome with joy, certainly, when he finds out the boy's living. And then, boy, just the cherry on top of it. Wow.
Right.
Jesus is rich. There's no, I might have to doubt before, there ain't no doubt that.
Right. So now we talk about like the effect of miracles. And let's go back a couple of weeks. What was the purpose of miracles? What was the goal? There was a couple of things. To prove Jesus was who he was. To do what, Lucille? To help make people believe. And then what else? Start with an F.
And you did a good thing.
None of those words start with an F, though. It starts with, it was a way to increase their faith going forward as well. Now, let's go to verse 53 then. What effect does this miracle have by the writing in verse 53? So the father knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said to him, your son lives. So like we said, the math makes sense. It all adds up. This matches this time, period. And he himself believed, and his whole household as well. Because I don't know what it would have been like there at the house with the kid who's been sick for seemingly forever. And then I say kid, I don't know how old he was, but the son. But the son who's been sick, and now he's better. But it seems like if you had been in their position, let's think about that for a minute. What if you had been at the house in the 7th hour? What's going through your mind? Well, you can't believe yet because you've not talked to the father. What if you're at the house the 7th hour when this son was healed? Right. Right.
I think you would say, wow, I just witnessed a miracle.
Right.
This boy is fine. He was sick as a dog. He's your dad. And now, bless his heart, he's fine. He's completely well. He's completely well. And that just don't happen. People come out of sicknesses gradually. They start getting a little stronger, eating a little bit more, moving a little bit more. This kid he's on his deathbed.
So with that being sort of maybe what you're thinking, does that make the back half of verse 53 make more sense? That it said he believed, but also who? His whole household right there. And so it's almost like two parts of the story converge, and now everybody's believing as a result. Agreed. Definitely. Yeah.
Daddy was in the hospital one time. He was in cardiac arrest in 1993, May, for 23 hours. And I spent the night with him after he kind of come out of the cardiac arrest. And I slept on the floor, and one of my contacts come out and couldn't see nothing the next day. When I woke up, couldn't have my glasses. And so Daddy gets up, and he shakes. He slept about 3 hours after he come out of the cardiac arrest. He gets up, and And the doctor came in, and the doctor just about fell over that. She said, "Yes, I never expected to see you alive." And Daddy was fine for that moment.
Right.
He lived 6 more months.
Right.
But and it was fascinating. I mean, I'm thinking, I'm laying there on the floor out in the hallway, and I'm thinking, I'll never see Daddy again.
Right.
And I'd go in every morning, and he'd just lay there, just a corpse.
Right.
And but it's almost a miracle. Now,
Right.
It's a miracle, but it's
Well, it kind of made you question probably what you're seeing, because it clearly did not jive with what you had seen when you went to bed. This question should have been at the beginning. We already asked it, but this is the second sign that Jesus has done in Cana. What had been the first? The water into wine. So what do you think is happening to Jesus's reputation based on these two things? The water to wine story, like we said, that you could maybe fake that one a little bit, right? You could maybe, but this one couldn't be. But now you've almost got, just a second ago, you saw two groups of people coming together. Now you've got people who were at the wedding, people who knew this boy who was, and now it's all sort of merging together.
Done this to his son versus just an everyday Joe Schmo.
Right. Definitely.
That's like us nowadays. For some reason, when celebrity says something, like, oh, it must be true.
Right. Right. You're right. You're exactly right. So, no, go ahead. 'Cause-
He believes somewhat, or he wouldn't have gone to Acts. And then when he tells him to go home and your son will be okay, from what we read here, he believes, it's like saying, well, I think he has a little bit more faith. And of course, once he gets down there, then he has all the faith that he needs. That his faith was growing with each step that he took.
Well, that's a really good comment that matches with exactly what I was about to say right there. But some things for us to leave with. Well, first of all, a little faith can go a long way, right? It's hard for us to measure how much faith this man had, but we know he had more after it was over than he did at the start, right? We can see that for sure. He must have had some kind of faith to have went to Jesus. Like you said a second ago, Ben, they're probably waiting at home, curious how it's going to play out, but he thought, well, this is my last best shot. We'll go give it a chance and see what it is. But we see this sort of emphasized link between the miracles and faith. Now, if the goal of miracles was to strengthen faith in Christ, then Jesus did that with this guy, right? He did it not only with that, but with his whole family as well. But Ben, you said something really good right there. Can our faith go into the wrong object? It absolutely can. Sometimes our faith can be strong, but it's in something that doesn't work for this. Unfortunately, for some people, sometimes when our faith is in something that's not going to work, we sort of pull back when we realize it doesn't work. And we question not just whatever our faith was in, but any faith in sort of anything as a result sometimes. And so we get that a little mixed up just a little bit. But right. That's a really good comment, Ben. I guess we could say that right here. I got to quit sending my information out to you all. Y'all are catching it too much. But God isn't limited to how and when he can heal, just as Jesus was, right? The distance between Capernaum and Cana is about 20 miles. It's 16 and a half miles. Like we said, that's a long way. But how did Jesus heal this young man? He from a distance, he spoke the word. He said, he told the man, go home. Your son is going to be fine. Now, I suspect that the nobleman probably went home thinking that his son was going to be a little bit better, or maybe like, oh, well, now he's setting up in the bed. He's been laying down forever, or whatever we might think about it. But the cure here was immediate and it was complete. We see that always in these miracles that Jesus does. They're not like a gradual, you will be healed eventually over time or the way it'll be. But we also see in what Jesus said there, or what Ben said there a minute ago, Jesus doesn't really have any set method for performing these miracles. Think about every miracle that you know of in the Bible. How many of them are the same? pretty rare, right? It was pretty rare. And, sometimes he said, bring that person to me. We see that from time to time. Other times, heals them without seeing them at all. He could heal by word, but sometimes it was by touch, right? But it wasn't always by touch. Sometimes it was here by word. Sometimes he asked a lot of questions, but sometimes he didn't do anything. Healed, right? And so every method is different. Now, why does that matter?
Because like what Ben said a minute ago, if he does it the same way every time, they're gonna start thinking, they're gonna look their faith wrong.
The object rather than the action, right? Your hand go- I was going to, so
It shows too, Jesus is supremely powerful over everything in the entire universe. He spoke it all into existence when it was formed, and he will speak it all into ruin.
So it's not the miracle. What was it? It was the faith, the belief in Jesus. The miracle could be executed in whatever way needed to be executed at that time. We talked last week about the fishes. Well, that one doesn't make sense unless it's in that setting right there. You needed something that would match with what it was. But it had nothing to do with the net, the weight. It didn't have anything to do with casting it this way or that way, but it had everything to do with the faith that was there. So our third lesson to leave with is faith, but pass it on. What if he went home and bottled up his own faith? Well, there's no. When Jesus told him, he said, go home, your son is healed. We don't see him doubt any. The guy just leaves. He goes right there. Doesn't seem like that. We don't read anything here about any kind of even like emotional reaction from the guy, like falling down or hugging, or we don't read any of that right there. He didn't really ask Jesus, okay, so when I get home, I need to put a wet cloth on his head, or we don't see any of that, right? He just goes on home. He starts the 16.5-mile journey back. He accepted the word that Jesus said that your son is healed, and he took it with him. But when he goes home, it has something of a double effect, right? Because the miracles healed the child, but what was the long-term success of what happened here? His family, he and his entire family saw what Jesus was teaching, and their faith was grown from that as well. So in order for us to grow in faith, we got to first of all believe what Jesus is teaching, right? That's going to be our starting point right there. But then we can't just bottle that up, but we got to do what with it? Spread it. Do you think there was anybody that this guy talked to after the fact and said, Jesus healed my son? Do you think there was anybody who didn't believe him? Of course.
Thomas seen all these miracles, he's present in all of them. Still, he had his doubt.
Mm-hmm. For us to pass something, though, that's a two-way thing, right? Two-way. We pass it. They have to accept it. Think about like in a football game. If you throw the ball, somebody else has to catch it. But if they don't catch it, you've still thrown it, right? So when we say faith, pass it on, we got to throw it out there. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to catch it. Sometimes you may see somebody knock it down, they don't want to catch it. That's not our problem, right? Our responsibility is to do what with it? Take it, spread it, go with it. And that's what we need to take with us here as we go. Any other thoughts before we close up shop? You're right.
That's what and we can be confident we'll be in heaven. We don't matter what this world is, because the miracle is that Jesus has come and died for us, and we can be in heaven. And not care how stupid we are, how whatever, incapable we are. We can go to heaven. That's all that matters.
Go on.
Going to what you're saying, Romans 1:17 says, for In it, righteous God is revealed from faith to faith, that is written, the righteous shall live by faith.
Right.
And it's talking about what you're talking about, faith to faith.
Absolutely. Any others? Thank you all.